I was never supposed to enter that part of the jungle. The elders had warned us for as long as I could remember. If you hear your name being called in the forest, never answer. They spoke of an ancient spirit that hunted in the shadows, wearing the skins of its victims like clothing. But I never believed in their stories. Not until the night my cousin Tiago disappeared. It happened on a full moon night, when the jungle was silver-lit and eerily silent. Tiago had left at dusk, his bow slung across his back, muttering about hunting alone. He never returned. The next morning, the village was restless. The elders gathered in whispers, their eyes dark with an unspoken fear. "He has been taken," one of them murmured, his voice brittle. "We must not go after him." My blood ran cold. Not go after him. Tiago was like a brother to me. We had grown up together, hunted side by side, and shared stories by the fire. How could they abandon him so easily? "He's still out there," I argued, my fists clenched. "What if he's hurt?" The elders didn't respond. Their silence was heavier than words. That was when I knew. They weren't afraid that Tiago was dead. They were afraid he wasn't. That night, when the others slept, I made my decision. I would find him. With a knife strapped to my hip and a torch in hand, I stepped into the jungle alone. The moment I crossed the tree line, the air changed. The thick canopy above swallowed the moonlight, drowning the world in an eerie darkness. A strange hush settled around me. Not a single bird. Not a whisper of wind. Only the rhythmic crunch of my footsteps on damp earth. I followed his trail carefully, broken branches, faint footprints in the mud. Tiago had come this way. My heart pounded with anticipation. I will find him. I have to. Minutes stretched into an hour. The deeper I went, the more the jungle felt wrong. The trees loomed taller, their gnarled roots twisting like grasping fingers. The air grew damp, thick with the scent of rotting leaves, and something else, something foul. Then I heard it. A voice in the darkness. "Mateus." I froze mid-step. It was Tiago. His voice was unmistakable, low, hoarse, but calm. He was close. Too close. I turned in every direction, but the jungle was a wall of blackness. I couldn't see him. "Tiago." I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. Just the rustling of leaves, as if something was moving, circling me. A shiver crept down my spine. My grip tightened around my knife. "Where are you?" I tried again, my voice trembling. Silence. Then footsteps. Soft, deliberate, coming from the trees ahead. I lifted my torch, the weak flame flickering against the oppressive dark. And that was when I saw them. Footprints in the mud. They led forward, vanishing between two towering trees. But something was wrong. There was only one set. Tiago had come this way, but he had never turned back. I stood there, staring at the footprints in the mud. The realization settled in my gut like a stone. Tiago had walked forward, but there were no tracks leading back. A cold sensation prickled the back of my neck. I wasn't alone. The jungle was too quiet. No insects, no distant animal cries. Only the distant rustle of leaves, as if something unseen was moving through the trees. Watching, waiting. I gripped my knife tighter and forced myself to move forward, stepping carefully over the footprints. My torch cast long, dancing shadows that twisted unnaturally against the bark. Each step felt heavier, like the jungle itself was pressing down on me, urging me to turn back. But I couldn't. Tiago is alive. That thought kept me going. I had to believe it. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. My breathing was too loud, the torch too dim. The deeper I walked, the stronger the scent of rot became. It clung to my skin, thick and rancid, like something old and festering just out of sight. Then, I heard the voice again. Soft, whispering. "Close. Mateus." My chest tightened. It was Tiago, but something about it was wrong. The way my name dragged unnaturally at the end, the way it barely carried through the air, like it wasn't coming from a mouth, but from somewhere deeper, as if the jungle itself was speaking. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "Tiago." Silence. Then a breath. Right behind me. I spun around, knife raised, my torchlight slicing through the darkness. Nothing. The jungle stood still, but the air had changed. It was heavier, charged with something unseen. I kept walking, my body rigid with tension. I moved faster, my instincts screaming for me to turn back. But just as the thought crossed my mind, I stepped into something wet. I looked down. Mud. Dark, thick, almost black. But then I noticed the smell. Metallic. Coppery. My pulse hammered as I lifted the torch higher. The ground wasn't mud. It was soaked in blood. I staggered back, while rising in my throat. And then I saw it, just a few feet ahead, hanging from a low branch. A strip of human skin. Still fresh. Still glistening. And just beneath it, the ground shifted. Something crawled between the trees, its movements slow and unnatural. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a shaky exhale. I couldn't see it clearly, but I knew it was there, watching me. Then it spoke again, this time in my voice. "Mateus, why did you come?" A shudder ran through my body. My fingers felt numb against the hilt of my knife. I turned to run, but the footprints were gone. The path I had come from no longer existed, and the jungle, once still, had begun to move. The jungle had swallowed the path behind me. I turned in frantic circles, my breath shallow. The footprints were gone. The trail I had followed into this nightmare had simply vanished. The trees looked the same in every direction, twisted, ancient, looming, like they had moved. The torch flickered, its weak light barely piercing the darkness. I swallowed hard, forcing my mind to focus. Stay calm. Think. But how could I, when something had just spoken with my voice? Then, the leaves ahead rustled. I froze. Something was there. A silhouette moved between the trees, slow, deliberate. My pulse thundered in my ears as I raised the torch higher. The shifting shadows bent and twisted, and then, I saw it. A clearing. A break in the suffocating jungle, where the moon cast a pale, silver glow on the earth. My feet moved before my mind could catch up, drawn to the open space like it was my only salvation. I stepped out from the trees, gasping for air, and stopped dead. Something was hanging from a low branch. My stomach twisted. Skin. It was human skin. Stretched, empty, dangling like a discarded husk. I felt my knees lock, my breath catching in my throat. My torchlight flickered over it, revealing stitch-like markings along the edges, as if it had been carefully removed. And then I recognized it. The scars on the forearm. The jagged cut across the collarbone. My body went cold. It was Tiago's skin. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the torch. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. It wasn't possible. This was some kind of sick joke. Tiago couldn't be. A sound came from beneath the hanging skin. A wet, shifting sound. I looked down. The earth moved. A shape stirred in the shadows. Low to the ground, crawling. Its body was thin, too thin, and its arms bent at angles that made my stomach lurch. The firelight caught a flash of something pale. A face. A face I knew. Tiago's face. But the eyes were wrong. Empty. Hollow. Like two gaping holes in a mask that didn't quite fit. It shuddered forward, limbs twitching as if struggling to adjust. Then it looked at me. And it smiled. A wide, unnatural grin. I choked on my own breath. My body screamed at me to run, to get away from this impossible horror. But I couldn't move, because then it spoke. "You took too long, Mateus." My blood turned to ice. The voice was Tiago's, but not quite. The tone was off. The syllables stretched too long, as if it were still learning how to use them. I forced a step back. The thing mimicked my movement, its head jerking unnaturally to one side. The torch trembled in my grip. The flames danced in the creature's hollow eyes, reflecting nothing. Then, before I could react, it started to stand. Not like a man, not like anything human. It peeled itself upward, limb by limb, vertebrae cracking, as if it had never moved this way before. The skin hanging above us fluttered. And I understood. It had worn Tiago. This thing had used his body like a disguise. A shell. And now it wanted another. I ran. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to get as far away as possible from the thing that wore my cousin's face. My feet pounded against the damp earth, my breath ragged and uneven. The jungle was a blur of shadows and twisted branches, but I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. Behind me, I heard it. Not running. Following. Its movements weren't natural. It didn't chase me like a man. There was no rhythm to its steps, no sound of steady footfalls, just an erratic, bone-cracking shuffle, like it was adjusting to a body that wasn't quite its own. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to reach the village. The elders would know what to do. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. But as I ran, something felt wrong. I should have been nearing the river by now. I knew this part of the jungle. I had hunted here 100 times. But the trees, they looked the same. Identical. I turned sharply to the right, breath burning in my chest. A fallen log blocked my path. I leapt over it, hitting the ground hard. I kept running. And then, the log was in front of me again. I stopped so fast I nearly collapsed. My stomach twisted. My head pounded. That wasn't possible. I had just passed it. The jungle wasn't letting me leave. A slow realization spread through me, colder than the night air. I was trapped. The ground beneath my feet suddenly felt deeper, softer, like wet earth that had been disturbed. My torch flickered, its glow dimming, the shadows stretching longer. Then, the voice came again, right behind me. "You don't have to run, Mateus." I turned, my breath catching in my throat. It stood at the edge of the firelight. Not Tiago. Not anymore. It had changed. The way it moved, the way it breathed. It wasn't mimicking him anymore. It was becoming something else. Something worse. And its mouth. Its mouth was too wide. Its grin stretched unnaturally, splitting at the corners as if its skin was resisting, barely containing whatever was inside. The air was thick with the smell of rot. The thing took a slow step forward, then another, and I realized it didn't need to chase me. It knew I wasn't getting out. My chest tightened. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had one choice. I had to break whatever hold this place had over me. I forced myself to breathe, to think. The Elder's warnings. Never answer when it calls your name. But I already had. Had that given it power? Had that trapped me here? It took another step. The skin on its arms shifted, as if something underneath was pressing against it. I gripped my knife tighter. There was only one way out of this. I had to do something it didn't expect. I had to lie. I steadied my voice as much as I could and spoke. "I'm not Mateus." The thing stopped. Its hollow eyes flickered. The grin twitched. It hesitated, confused. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run again. "Who told you my name?" I whispered. It tilted its head. The skin around its mouth cracked. Then, for the first time, it stepped back. A crack of distant thunder rumbled through the trees. The wind picked up, the jungle shifting slightly, like the moment before a storm. I took a slow step backward, then another, and then, before it could move again, I ran. This time, the path didn't close, and the jungle finally let me leave. I didn't stop running until I saw the first torches of the village. The moment I crossed the tree line, my legs gave out. My knees hit the dirt hard, my lungs burning, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold onto my knife. I sucked in deep, ragged breaths, the world spinning around me. I was out. I had made it. But something was wrong. The village was silent. The fire pits burned low, their embers glowing dimly in the dark. The huts stood motionless, their entrances yawning open like empty mouths. Where was everyone? I forced myself to my feet, my body aching, my vision swimming. My mind was screaming at me to wake the elders, to tell them what I had seen, what had followed me. But then I heard it, a whisper, low, almost too soft to catch. Right behind me, my skin went cold. I turned my head slowly, my pulse pounding. At the edge of the jungle, where the darkness met the firelight, something stood. Still, watching, the same tooth in frame, the same wrongness in its stance. But this time, it didn't try to hide. It just stared at me as if waiting. A cold realization settled in my gut. It hadn't needed to chase me. It had known all along. I hadn't escaped. I had brought it with me. I took a shaky step back, my legs screaming in protest. My body wanted to collapse, but I couldn't. Not now. I turned, ready to run to the elder's hut, to scream for help. And I froze, because at the entrance of the village, standing between two huts, was Tiago. He was just standing there, motionless. Something inside me twisted. No, I had seen him. I had seen what happened to him. This wasn't possible. His skin was clean, his body whole. He looked exactly as I remembered, except for his eyes. They weren't hollow anymore, but they weren't his. They were too black, too deep, like they didn't end. And then he smiled. Mateus. The voice was warm, familiar. Perfect. But I knew better now. I stepped back, shaking my head. My knife was still in my hand, but what use was it? You can't fight something that isn't real. I had lied to it in the jungle. I had broken its hold for a moment. But what if that wasn't the end? What if it could wear faces, too? What if it was already inside? A sharp gust of wind cut through the village, rattling the torches. The embers flared for a moment, then dimmed again. The shadows stretched long and distorted. And in the flickering half-light, Tiago's shape shuddered. Just for a second, like it was struggling to hold together. Like it wasn't finished becoming. A deep chill crawled up my spine. I wasn't safe. Not yet. I needed the elders. I needed answers. And I needed them before it was too late. I turned and ran toward the elder's hut, Tiago's voice calling after me. Soft. Gentle. Wrong. You took too long, Mateus. I didn't stop running until I reached the elder's hut. My hands trembled as I pulled back the thick curtain covering the entrance. Inside, a dim fire flickered, casting long, uneasy shadows against the walls. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke, but even the familiar comfort of the place did nothing to steady my nerves. 3 elders sat in a circle, their faces partially obscured by the flickering light. Their eyes lifted to me the moment I stepped inside. They had been waiting. I gasped for breath, words tumbling from my lips in a rush. It's here. It followed me. I saw Tiago, but it's not him. One of them, the oldest, lifted a wrinkled hand. His expression was grim. We know. I froze. You know. My voice wavered. The other elder, a woman with silvered braids, nodded. Sit, Mateus. You have seen what many of us fear to name. I hesitated but sank onto the floor, my body still tense, ready to run. You have to help me, I whispered. It's wearing him. Or it's wearing something. And it's here. In the village. The old man exhaled deeply. It was always here. A chill wrapped around my spine. What do you mean? The third elder, a man with sharp, sunken eyes, leaned forward. You were warned, Mateus. The jungle holds things older than memory. Things that do not die, because they were never truly alive. I clenched my jaw. You knew this would happen. The woman met my gaze, unblinking. We knew the moment you left, you would not return alone. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Then tell me how to stop it. The 3 elders exchanged a long look. Then the old man spoke. You must understand, Mateus, this thing does not hunt flesh. It does not seek blood. His eyes darkened. It seeks a home. I stared at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. A home, I whispered. The elder nodded. It wears the skin of the lost, waiting for a moment of weakness. It cannot take you by force, Mateus, but it can become you. It can make you believe you are seeing your cousin, that you are speaking to him, that he is real, until one day you forget he is not. My throat tightened. I thought of Tiago, of his voice calling my name in the jungle, of the way he stood at the entrance of the village, too still, too perfect, of the flicker in his form, as if his shape was unstable, still unfinished. I had already answered him once. I had let him in, and now it was waiting for me to break. I gripped my knees, my nails digging into my skin. Then how do I stop it? The old woman inhaled sharply. You cannot kill what was never alive, but you can reject it. I looked up, my breath uneven. Reject it. You must refuse it, Mateus. Deny it completely. Do not let it take root in your mind. Do not listen to its voice. Do not look into its eyes. I shook my head, my voice barely above a whisper. And if I fail? The elder's gaze was heavy. Then it will no longer be outside waiting. Her voice dropped lower. It will be inside you, wearing your skin. I stepped out of the elder's hut, my skin cold despite the humid night air. The village was too quiet, too still. Their words echoed in my mind. It cannot take you by force, but it can become you. I swallowed hard. I had been running, fighting, desperate to escape something I thought was hunting me. But what if the real danger wasn't out in the jungle anymore? What if it was already inside? The torches flickered weakly, their flames barely holding on against the night. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the dirt paths between the huts. Then I saw him. Tiago. He stood exactly where I had left him, near the edge of the village, between the huts, his figure half cast in shadow. He hadn't moved. Not a single step. My breath hitched in my throat. Deny it, Mateus. I forced my feet forward, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I needed to prove to myself that this wasn't real, that it couldn't be him. As I stepped closer, he lifted his head slightly. Mateus, he said softly. My stomach twisted. It was my cousin's voice. Perfect. Flawless. No. I clenched my fists. You're not real. His expression didn't change. He took a slow step forward. You don't have to be afraid, he said. I found my way back. Just like you. I held my ground, even as every instinct screamed at me to move. You're lying, I whispered. The thing that wore my cousin's face tilted its head. The movement was slow, unnatural. You saw me, Mateus, it murmured. In the jungle. You know I'm real. I shook my head, trying to block out its words. It was trying to make me doubt. That's how it worked. It waits for a moment of weakness, until one day, you forget he is not real. My breathing turned shallow. Then, it took another step forward, and I saw it. For just a fraction of a second, it flickered, like a reflection on water, rippling and unstable. My stomach turned to ice. It wasn't finished. It was still becoming. "You're not Tiago," I said through clenched teeth. The thing smiled, and then it laughed. Not loudly, not in a way that echoed through the village, but softly, just for me, like it knew something I didn't, like it had already won. And as the sound crawled up my spine, I felt something shift deep inside me. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure if I had spoken fast enough. I wasn't sure if I still believed my own words. And I wasn't sure. If it knew that, I couldn't stay here. The elders had told me what to do, but what if I was already too late? What if by standing here, by listening, I had already let it in? You must reject it. But doubt gnawed at me. Tiago, or what wore his face, stood just a few feet away now, his head still tilted in that unnatural way, his expression calm. Patient. "You're tired," he murmured. "You've been running all night. You don't have to anymore." His voice was soft, coaxing, like he knew I was unraveling, like he knew how close I was to breaking. I turned and ran. I didn't stop to see if he followed. I didn't need to. I could feel him there. The elder's hut came into view, the fire inside still burning, casting the only warmth left in this place. My hands shook as I threw back the curtain and stumbled inside. The three elders didn't look surprised. "It is here, isn't it?" I gasped, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The oldest nodded. "You saw its true form?" "Just for a second," I whispered. "It flickered. It's still changing." The woman elder leaned forward, her face grim. "Then you are not lost yet." I clenched my fists. "What do I do?" The man with sunken eyes began gathering a bowl of herbs, grinding them with a stone. "The ritual must be done before dawn. If you wait, the thing outside will no longer be outside." A sharp chill ran through me. "Sit," the old man ordered. "And whatever you hear, whatever calls your name, you must not answer." I sank to the ground, my body rigid. The woman sprinkled a dark powder into the flames, and the hut filled with thick, choking smoke. My vision blurred. Then, the whispers started. Soft at first, curling around the edges of my mind. "Mateus, come outside." I clenched my jaw. A deeper voice, just beyond the hut. "You don't need this, Mateus. You already know the truth." I squeezed my eyes shut. The elders chanted, their words rhythmic, hypnotic. The smoke thickened, pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. The whispers turned to pounding. The hut's walls shuddered. "Mateus." The voice was right behind me. I felt the breath on my neck, but I knew the door hadn't opened. I gripped the floor beneath me, my nails digging into the dirt. "Do not listen. Do not believe it." The air turned cold. Then, "Mateus." My mother's voice. My breath caught. The pounding stopped. The elders' chanting became distant, as if sinking underwater. The smoke curled around me, suffocating. My mother. She was dead, but the voice was perfect. Soft. Familiar. "Mateus, please." I squeezed my eyes shut. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Tears burned behind my eyelids. It sounded so real. A hand touched my shoulder. Cold. So cold. "Mateus, let me in." For just a second, I almost believed. Then, the fire roared. A burst of light filled the hut, and the voice screamed. Not my mother's voice anymore. Not even close. Something else. Something inhuman. The hand vanished. The shadows twisted violently, then collapsed into nothing. And suddenly, the night was silent. I opened my eyes. The fire had dimmed. The smoke was clearing. The elders watched me, waiting. I turned toward the entrance. Tiago was gone. The thing outside was gone. I exhaled shakily. "Is it over?" I whispered. The old man sighed. "For now." Dawn broke over the village, casting a dull, gray light over the huts. The jungle beyond the tree line looked the same as it always had, dense, still, unknowable. But I knew better now. It wasn't over. The elders watched me in silence. They had finished the ritual. I was still here. My skin was my own, but something inside me felt wrong. I pushed myself up slowly, every muscle aching. The scent of burnt herbs still clung to the air, mixing with the damp morning breeze. "Go rest," the old woman said. "Your body is here, but your mind is still lost in the night." I wanted to believe that, but the words felt hollow. I nodded and left the hut. The village was waking up. People moved between the huts, starting their daily routines, oblivious to the thing that had lurked in the darkness just hours before. I walked through them in a haze, barely feeling the dirt beneath my feet. I should have felt safe. I should have felt whole. But I didn't. I made my way to the small stream at the edge of the village, my mouth dry, my skin still damp with sweat. I knelt by the water, cupping my hands to drink. Then, I hesitated. My reflection wavered. The rippling surface distorted my face, stretching my features for just a moment before settling again. I exhaled sharply. It was just the water, just my own exhaustion. I leaned in closer. My reflection stared back. Normal. But then, my lips moved. I hadn't moved them. I froze. The face in the water smiled. I wasn't smiling. I shot backward, scrambling away from the stream, my heart hammering. The reflection had already returned to normal. I ran my hands over my face, feeling my skin, my mouth, my eyes. Everything was the same. But for just one moment, I had seen it. A crack in reality. A glimpse of something still there. I clenched my fists, my breath shaky. Then it will no longer be outside, waiting. Had I truly escaped? Or had it just moved somewhere deeper? I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was just my mind trying to recover from the night before. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. But the feeling didn't go away. The village moved on. People laughed, worked, prepared for the next hunt. The jungle was just the jungle again. No one else saw what I saw. No one else heard the voice. Because it was still there. Not outside. Inside. At first, it was just a whisper. A thought that wasn't mine. A flicker of doubt in the back of my mind. You were too slow, Mateus. I ignored it. But then it came again. You let it in. I told myself it wasn't real. Then one night, I awoke to the sound of breathing. Not mine. It was close. Too close. My body was frozen. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced my gaze to the far side of my hut, my mouth dry. The moonlight streamed through the doorway, casting silver light across the dirt floor. The village was silent, but something was inside. A shadow. Not a shape. A shadow. Tall. Waiting. Watching. I squeezed my eyes shut. Deny it. Reject it. Do not let it take root. But how could I? When it was already here. When I could feel it inside my own skin. I stayed awake until the first light of dawn crept through the doorway. Only then did I move. Only then did I breathe. When I finally stood, my body stiff and cold, I turned to the only thing that could tell me the truth. The small bronze mirror my mother had left behind. I stepped toward it slowly, my hands trembling. I took a breath and lifted it. The face staring back was mine. But for just a second, the eyes were not. I dropped the mirror. It shattered against the floor. The whisper came one last time, curling around my mind like smoke. You let me in. And then silence.